The people who use guilt against you rarely accuse you of anything. They sigh, go quiet, pull away slightly. Their texts get shorter, their voice changes, their energy shifts. And suddenly you're apologizing for a crime nobody explained. You know this feeling. You replay the conversation. You scan every word. You search for the mistake. Did I say something wrong? Did I upset them? Should I fix this? And the worst part? Nobody asked you to apologize. Nobody said you were selfish. Nobody said you failed. But guilt arrived anyway. Fast, automatic, heavy. Like your body received a warning before your mind understood it. And then, suddenly, you reach out first. You explain. You soften. You shrink. You restore peace. Again. And what they noticed was terrifying, because once someone realizes guilt controls you, they never need to raise their voice again. They never need threats. Never need conflict. Because your own conscience starts doing the work for them. And if this keeps happening to you, this was never a personality flaw. It was a pressure point. And someone learned exactly where it was. Think about the last time this happened. Someone felt off. Maybe a friend, maybe a partner, maybe a parent. Maybe one message ended with a period instead of a heart. Maybe they looked disappointed. Maybe they said, "I'm fine." That sentence. 2 words. Nothing else. And suddenly your mind started working against you. You replayed everything. You searched for damage. You looked for evidence. You tried to restore warmth. Not because you wanted to. Because something deeper took over. Because somewhere earlier in your life you learned a dangerous lesson. You learned someone else's discomfort was your emergency. You learned if someone around you felt upset, you had work to do. Fix it, calm it, solve it, carry it, even when you had done nothing wrong. And then, suddenly you learned. Peace was something you earned, not something you deserved, something you worked for. Something you protected, something you paid for. And once that lesson gets inside you, it follows you everywhere, into friendships, relationships, family, work, everywhere. You answer messages immediately. You apologize before anyone accuses you. You explain too much. You panic when energy changes. You feel responsible for emotions nobody handed you. And someone notices. Not immediately, quietly, by watching, by testing, by pulling away slightly and seeing what happens. And what happens? You chase. When they withdraw, you chase. When they go cold, you warm. When they seem hurt, you apologize. Every single time. Dr. Martha Stout spent 25 years treating survivors of psychological manipulation. Her finding was brutal. The people most successfully controlled were never the weakest ones. They were the most conscientious. The ones who genuinely could not tolerate the idea of having caused someone pain. George Simon called them the perfect targets. Not because they were naive, because their empathy had no off switch. And Robert Cialdini proved that guilt, real or manufactured, activates the same psychological compliance as a direct request, meaning someone's sigh can control you as effectively as a command. You just never saw it as a command. Martin Seligman ran experiments that changed how we understand human behavior under pressure. He discovered that after repeated exposure to situations they could not control, people stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. He called this learned helplessness, and it happens to humans who grow up in environments where their emotional responses were repeatedly used against them, where saying no led to withdrawal of love, where disagreement led to cold silence that lasted until they broke. Over time, these people stop trusting their own emotional signals. They stop believing their discomfort is valid. They start assuming that if someone is upset, it must be because of them. You stop fighting, not because you agree, Because your nervous system gets tired of losing. You stop trusting your own reactions. You stop trusting your anger. You stop trusting your discomfort. You stop trusting yourself. Because every time you tried to say no, something happened. Distance, silence, disappointment, withdrawal, coldness. And eventually your mind reaches a brutal conclusion. Keeping everyone happy feels safer. And then suddenly you start apologizing for having needs. You apologize for asking questions. You apologize for being hurt. You apologize for existing too loudly. You apologize before entering rooms. And you don't even notice anymore. Because survival habits never announce themselves. They become personality. That is where guilt becomes dangerous. Because guilt feels moral. Guilt feels responsible. Guilt feels like proof you care. But guilt can be trained, conditioned, directed, used. You think you are protecting relationships. Meanwhile, you are protecting emotional weather patterns. Someone sighs, you panic. Someone gets distant, you panic. Someone changes tone, you panic. And then, suddenly your entire emotional world starts. Orbiting another person's mood, not your values, not truth, not reality, their mood. You've lived this before. A friend suddenly becomes hurt the moment you finally prioritize yourself. The exact day, the exact hour. You finally make plans. You finally choose yourself. And suddenly, wow, guess you're too busy now. Not anger, not direct conflict, just enough disappointment to make guilt. Wake up, and it works. You cancel plans. You explain yourself. You overcompensate. And then suddenly peace returns. A partner goes cold after you set a boundary. Not screaming, not arguing. Just distance, less affection, less warmth, less attention. Until your body starts feeling unsafe. Until eventually you break. You text first. You apologize. You fix. You repair. Even though you were the one hurting. A parent reminds you of everything they sacrificed. Everything, the money, the effort, the years, right when you start creating a life of your own, and suddenly your independence starts feeling selfish. Your freedom starts feeling cruel. Your growth starts feeling like betrayal. And then suddenly you feel guilty for becoming yourself. Read that again. You feel guilty for becoming yourself. Real guilt feels like a spotlight. It points somewhere. You know what happened. You know what you did. You crossed your own values. You hurt someone. You recognize it. You correct it. You grow. But manufactured guilt feels different. Manufactured guilt feels like fog. Heavy, confusing, everywhere. You feel guilty but cannot identify why. You feel responsible but cannot identify for what. And then suddenly you stop asking, what happened? And start asking, what's wrong with me? That question destroys people, because now guilt is no longer pointing at behavior, it's pointing at identity. Real guilt points at something. Manufactured guilt points at you. That difference changes everything. The moment you believe you are responsible for everyone else's feelings, your life stops belonging to you. That is the trap. Because now anyone can control your emotional state. Anyone. One look, one sigh, one cold message, one shift in energy, and your day collapses. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing about emotional detachment. He was writing about emotional clarity. The clarity to know the difference between something you actually did wrong and something someone wants you to believe you did wrong. And then suddenly you realize something. You spent years carrying emotional debt nobody assigned to you. Years trying to prevent sadness, prevent discomfort, prevent disappointment, prevent silence. You carried responsibilities that never belonged to you. No wonder you're tired. No wonder you feel exhausted. You were never fixing the relationship. You were managing someone else's emotions at the expense of your own. Next time guilt arrives, slow down. Not forever, just long enough. Ask, what exactly did I do? Not, what am I feeling? Not, how uncomfortable is this? Ask, what exactly happened? Specific, clear, real. Because guilt loves vagueness. Vague guilt spreads, specific guilt reveals. And then suddenly you notice something strange. Sometimes there is no answer, no betrayal, no cruelty, no offense, only discomfort. Only tension, only someone else's emotions asking for a volunteer. Do not volunteer automatically. Sit there, wait, let silence exist, let disappointment exist, let tension breathe. Your body will scream at first. Fix it, text them, apologize, restore peace. Don't, stay still, watch carefully, because what happens next tells you everything. Here is the truth most never learn. Your conscience is not weakness. It is one of the best things about you. But conscience without clarity becomes a doorway, and guilt walks through it. Again, again, again. The goal was never to care less. The goal was never becoming cold. The goal was never becoming numb. The goal is seeing clearly. Because there is a difference between disappointing someone and wronging someone, a massive difference, and someone has been hoping you never notice it. Because the moment you do, something changes. You stop calling it love. You stop calling it concern. You stop calling it your fault. You call it what it is. And then suddenly, you stop paying emotional debts you never owed. Think about one person whose displeasure always becomes your emergency. Now ask yourself something harder. When was the last time your pain became theirs? When was the last time your silence worried them? When was the last time your hurt changed their behavior? Take your time, because that answer tells you more than excuses ever will. Subscribe to Psychex. Because once you understand how guilt is manufactured, you stop carrying emotions someone quietly placed inside your hands.